Welcome to the Tudor Dixon Podcast. I'm excited today because we have Ashley Hayek with us. She is the Executive Director of America First Works and a former 2020 Trump campaign coalitions director. But you might not even know what America First Works is because it was working so hard for you with so many different things. And that's why I wanted to bring Ashley on today so that you could kind of brag on what your organization has done. We have a huge win. We're all super excited. And people are like, how did it happen? And you know that. So welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I think it's incredible because we heard from the liberal media for months that Trump had no ground game, Trump had no coalition, Trump had nothing. And really, we kept our head down. And it wasn't just, America First Works, but it was Tea Party Patriots. It was, AMAC Action. It was you, Tudor. It was everybody. There was a group of us, almost 100 different organizations that were working every single day. Polaris with Morgan Ortagus, like every single day, just trying to make sure that we get America First messaging out, knocking on doors, sending text messages into the battleground states. And it paid off. And, the greatest part is I think this is the greatest coalition we've ever seen. And I think back to being at Madison Square Garden about a week before the election and being backstage with Michael Harris, who is one of the founders of Death Row Records, who endorsed President Trump. And I'm standing there with Michael and I'm looking, there's Tulsi Gabbard and RFK and Dr. Phil and Hulk Hogan and Elise Stefanik and all of these, and Tiffany Justice from Moms for Liberty. There's all these amazing people and it's such a diverse coalition, but it's not what the left ever wants to talk about. They just want to call us all sexist and racist.
Well, and it's not the coalition that they had. They had a bunch of celebrities. I think they thought that they were going to come out with these celebrities and kind of poo-poo the fact that Tulsi Gabbard was there, even though she has not only experience as a congresswoman and running for president herself, but also military experience. Then you have RFK, who is a Kennedy that comes over to our side. These are all political figures. These are all people with government experience. They had people that don't even have working class experience. Yeah. They don't have middle class experience. They don't understand the American people at all. That backfired, but it wasn't just that. I mean, I think people look at this and they're like, oh, there was like this great magic of Trump going up against these celebrities and this fake campaign, but it was a lot of work behind the scenes. So how did that happen? Because there was a lot of discussion of no ground game, but ground game sprung up over time. And I think at first there was some concern that they have a much stronger ground game. We as Republicans have not historically had this. And that's why you did this, correct?
That's right. So we had a meeting on April 3rd where we pulled in all of the organizations and we wanted to get a sense of who was going to do what where. And this was around the time that the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, released a memo or a decision. I guess it was more of an interpretation that now door-to-door canvassing you can work with federal campaigns on. It was not part of elections communications. So we just wanted to get a very clear sense. What is American Principles Project? What is Terry Schilling's group going to do? What is Moms for Liberty and Moms for America going to do? What voters are they going to contact? And who's going to physically be on the grounds? And so what we learned is that a lot of groups, they don't necessarily have a ground infrastructure, which is fine. It was never really the expectation of outside groups to have that role, but it was really an opportunity for us to say like, okay, this is something where we could be an added value to the conservative movement. So, and it was helpful because as a lot of groups were doing the digital ads or doing text messaging, it kind of laid the groundwork for us to send our door knockers to the doors and have those conversations with people. So starting in June was when we started putting teams on the ground in the target states to do canvassing in specific counties that we knew could ultimately determine the future of the country.
And that was called Project 19. So explain that, because I think a lot of people hear that and they're like, oh, this is another one of those crazy things, but it was 19 counties. And then I think some people step back from that and go, wait a minute, how do you win the presidency with 19 counties?
Yeah, we tried to be very intentional. We're a 3-year-old organization. And so going from a, relatively unknown group and trying to raise funds for this, door knocking, door canvassing can be expensive. So we knew we had to be very intentional. Bucks County, Pennsylvania is a bellwether county. They say where Bucks County goes, the rest of the state goes. So we knew we needed to have an infrastructure there. We also knew in Delaware County and Montgomery County and Chester County, there were really key counties where there's density and you can run up the score, and we could be really successful, and it would also help the rest of the state. Same with Allegheny County, which is where Pittsburgh is, having teams there. In Arizona, we focused on Maricopa County. So each of those counties were, where we wanted to make sure that we had a very strong presence. And we also went to places that were really a little unconventional. So for example, we had a team in Wayne County, specifically Dearborn Heights, and Hamtramck. They were 20 Arab American young men who were really upset with how the direction of the country was going. They were mad that everything cost a lot more money. They were upset with all of the transgender agenda being pushed in the schools. That was a big issue in Dearborn and with the books and everything in the schools, and it was against their values. And so those boys, some of them knocked 10, 11, 12,000 doors easily between July and Election Day. And that's, I think, also the fact that we started so early was just critical. A lot of times conservative organizations wait until after Labor Day to start doing their ground game. The only exception to that I've seen has been SBA list. And so building a permanent infrastructure where when a campaign is over, it's not just revolving around one person. This can live in perpetuity, and we can continue to do that and continue to build relationships in these communities. We started with 19 counties. By the end of it, we had 47 counties that we were canvassing in.
Wow. So I find it interesting when you talk about Hamtramck here in Michigan. We went there, we talked to the folks there, and what I think is interesting, and I think it's interesting for the entire country, and maybe I'm giving something away to the Democrats, but I've watched these sad sack Democrats go on TV every day this week and be like, how could the country be so racist? How could the country be so bad? And instead of saying, how can we come together? How can we find our people and find out what are we missing? What messaging do we have wrong? They're like, how can we shame them into coming back? And how can we punish them? And I think that's kind of the difference that people are now seeing between the Republicans and the Democrats. The Republicans aren't the party of punishing. Look at what Donald Trump went through. He was viciously punished by the Democrats. But it's not just Donald Trump. And that's what I don't think a lot of people have realized, is that this goes beyond just punishing the highest levels. Because the mayor of Hamtramck, I was talking to him and he's like, we came out for the first time in 22 and supported your campaign here in Michigan. And then we realized the Republicans were really on our side. We're conservatives, and we don't like that agenda. So you probably, those of you listening, you've probably heard the story about the Muslim mayor in Michigan who decided to ban flags on city buildings. You could only have the city, the state, or the U.S. flag on city buildings, which obviously also means your schools. And the Democrats were very mad about it. And he said, do you know that for the decades that we have lived here in Michigan and been Democrats, the Republicans have had control of the House and the state House and the state Senate, and they have never punished us. But the minute the Democrats got control, they pulled our funding, and we know it was because of that decision, and that was a punishment. And I think the Democrats are going to continue to do that.
I think you're exactly right. Our messaging at the door was, this is what America First policies look like. We want you to have more money in your pocket. We want you to have a prosperous life. We want you to be able to pursue the American dream. We should be putting America first, not foreign countries. We should have safe communities and safe borders. It's really simple. One of our door hangers that we had was in the shape of California, and it said, don't let Kamala Harris, California, our America. And that resonated so well with so many people. And you see, especially after, in 2021, when the borders were opened up, when there was defunding the police department, people felt unsafe, and our country has not been prioritizing the American people. I think there's no secret sauce. It's just that the left cannot get out of their own way when it comes to wanting more power and control, and they don't even recognize that they are now the party of the corporate elite.
Well, and I think putting America first doesn't necessarily mean not being involved in the world. It means peace. And that was what resonated so much. When you look at some of these communities that came over for the first time, and I would say in Michigan, we had that benefit of having the Arab community come over for the first time, really, in a presidential election in a big way. And it's interesting because not only did he win the the Arab community, but he brought a lot of the Jewish community over too. And it wasn't
exactly
because
right.
he wanted war. It was because he wants peace. And people are like, what a novel concept. When someone comes and talks about peace, they actually get votes, So I think that the messaging has just changed, but I think it's also about no longer being a politician, being a human, going and talking to them. This is the first time Donald Trump had been there, but also you're sending people there. So tell us a little bit more about how America First Works moves forward, goes for, like, what is the next step? Because what I'm hearing on the ground here, and I think that this is what everybody is saying, Donald Trump is an anomaly. This guy is a machine. He's something different than we're ever going to see, something different than we ever have seen, something different than we will ever see. And that has to have some sort of coattails. And that has to mean that folks like you at America First Works have to create those coattails. So what happens going forward in 26? You're going to see congressional races. I don't know how many Senate races we have, but you're going to see state races. Do you still work in those? What happens?
So there's a couple things. When we first were going into the communities, we partnered with different organizations to do community events or town halls. So there was a framing and local media piece around the policies first and foremost. I think one of the things as conservatives we have a little bit failed to do is not talk about the solutions. And that was, Kamala Harris's biggest downfall was she kept talking about joy and vibes, but she never said how is she going to fix the economy or get more jobs or stop, the crime, etc. So because she had no solution, no one bought into her vision. Whereas on our side, on the conservative side, we have solutions. We have a lot of solutions. And so that was the first, when we visited people 3 times, the first 2 times we talked about what issues are most important to you. And we would follow up educating them and advancing those policies. It wasn't until the 3rd visit did we start talking about the politics, which I think is really important. Moving forward, we have to remember that the first 100 days of the new administration are going to be absolutely critical. And we also know that the establishment media is not going to be truthful about the policies and what this president is going to do. So we believe we have an obligation to continue the relationships with the people in these communities and share with them, okay, you said when we visited your home that you care about the border. Here's what this president is doing on the border today. And let's just continue.
So you have that record of what each door, what the conversations were at each door?
Exactly. We had a survey that was completed, and then we also did text messaging just based on policies. So now we know, what voters care about, and we can deliver those policies to people directly, and they're not getting misinformation from the establishment media. So it's really, I like to look at this as business. I think if politics were run more like business, we'd be a lot more efficient. So there are customers, we know what they want. How do we serve them? How do we provide good customer service? And then how do you keep that customer? How do you retain that customer and that low propensity voter? That was what we really focused on, is expanding that section. So how do we keep them engaged and informed on what's happening? And I think that will, continue to help us in those midterm elections and in the first 100 days even.
So then when you look at the next election, like, what is the next election that you will continue to be involved in? Will you do any work in 26, or are you looking at another presidential?
I think the FEC races, or the FEC opinion, was a game changer for 501c4s because it gave us a lot of freedom. Mm-hmm. So I think on the House side and the Senate side would be, we'll definitely be involved in 2026. But I think you have to start laying that groundwork in 2023. So 2025. That was what we did in 2023, was we started going into communities and looking at election integrity issues, looking at policy issues, having conversations to understand those communities first. So then when it was election time, we're not just saying, hey, we're an outside group that hasn't been in your community and we're going to tell you what you think. We're actually continuing to have conversations.
And I think that's been the concern when some of these midterm races come. Like, there's not a group that's coming in. There's no ground game moving because there's no group that does this. But like you said, the Democrats have done this historically very well. But I think I wouldn't say historically. I mean, let me couch that by saying I think after 2016, they were so shocked that they ended up saying, okay, we're going to put in all of these different organizations that are going to do exactly what your group is doing. And then in the meantime, they kept those groups active. So my question to you is that going to, do the Republicans understand that there is something special in Donald Trump and that this has to be really reinforced? This has to become bigger.
I believe so. I really, really believe so. And I think that was also what Elon Musk said when he had the America PAC, when he launched that. He said, this is not just about one person. This is about growing this movement. So I think between the America PAC, America First Works, and other organizations, I mean, there's a lot of really special organizations. For example, Hunter Nation. Hunter Nation, their messaging targets specifically, gun owners, hunters, and they can deliver messages in a way that we at America First Works cannot, because we don't have the same branding or surrogates. So how do we start working more strategically? But how are they connected?
Because you have some of these groups that are in a way partners to you. And so how do you work together with those groups? Because I think that's what we've seen kind of with the Arabella model on the Democrat side, is there's this place where all this money comes in, and then they sort of say, okay, you are going to talk to this group and you're going to talk to that group. And that had historically worked. And then I think they got so off this time because obviously switching Biden out at the last minute made them look like, obviously you thought Biden was a bad guy and you put him in anyway. And then you picked this woman who has not been vetted. She doesn't know. She's been sitting next to the White House having no idea what's happening clearly. And that was all, I think it was kind of the perfect storm. We had the perfect candidate. Yeah. They had the worst possible scenario. And so when you look at this, what these individual groups that have partnered with you, what do they do and how do you keep in touch?
Well, actually, I think you hit on a really important point. People don't realize how divided the Democrat Party was. They did not realize that there were so many fractures within the party. And you look at, 3 days after or 2 days after Kamala Harris got Joe Biden's endorsement and Clinton's had endorsed her, Black Lives Matter put out a statement saying that there should be a mini primary. I really believe that's what the Obamas wanted as well. So there were so many, and then you had, the Palestine Jewish fracture. Then you had this Teamsters who wouldn't endorse her. So there were so many different divisions within the Democrat Party that look at with Black Americans, right? And the difference between like men and women and all of the issues. They had been so condescending, calling masculinity toxic. That doesn't bode well with Hispanic men or Black American men. And we saw all of those, different fractures happening across the party, and they couldn't get together. I follow several of the liberal Instagram accounts, and they wouldn't even get behind, they wouldn't even endorse her until the weekend before the election. And this is a party that really counted on mail and early voting, and they just didn't show up.
It was kind of amazing, Trump's lead with Hispanic voters. How did that outreach go? Because I remember early on when in the spring, when we were all sitting together, the Hispanic groups were saying, there's no ads. There's no ads in Spanish. The Democrats have done such a great job. How did that change and morph over time? And how did we end up reaching out to those folks?
So we did a little bit of ground game with that. We did some text messaging with that. I know there were some other groups that were involved. Babu Nanwe from Goya, CEO of Goya, has been absolutely phenomenal. He traveled all over the country. Jesus Marquez in Nevada was phenomenal. He was really organizing and mobilizing in Nevada. Bienvenido had a very strong presence in Arizona, but one of the groups that did a really phenomenal job on the advertising part of this was Job Creator Network with Alfredo Ortiz. And they had significant advertisement and radio ads targeting and just, educating Hispanic voters. I think that had a big impact. And it was definitely a big difference compared to the last election cycle. But this is something that we've been working on for the past 4 years. Is how do you continue to bring these policies to the Hispanic communities or historically underserved or ignored communities. And that's something I think we've just really excelled at, is making the conservative movement, the America First movement, big tent while they're, infighting on the other side.
Would you say you were in all the swing states?
We were in all the swing states, yes.
And then if people want to get involved, what do they do? How do they talk to you guys? How do they keep this going? Is there like a program that they can do locally?
Yeah, so if you go on americafirstworks.com, you can sign up to volunteer, and depending upon your community, we could plug you in. One thing that was really important for us was to have real conversations with people through text messaging. So we had about 50 volunteers who literally just replied to text messages after we deploy them. And it's funny because all of us get a million text messages around, political election season. And some people would reply with "F you," and our team would say, "We're so sorry to bother you. We just wanted to make sure you knew your polling place and see if you're planning to vote early. And they would say, oh my gosh, this is a real person. I can't believe it. And then they would have a conversation with us. So changing the game, again, providing that service. So there are volunteers who do that for us. We're still doing canvassing. We're doing follow-up. And we'll continue to do that early into next year. So America First Works is where to get involved.
How much does an operation like this cost? I mean, we know that there's billions of dollars that went into this cycle, and we had heard that there was a group here and a group there, but how much were you able? I mean, you were very young. Like you said, you're like a toddler organization, 3 years old. It started out as like a couple $1 million. So how over time did you bring, how much did you end up having to bring in and then deploy in this race?
So we started with, every year was about a $2 million organization. Our goal initially was about $10 million for this effort. When we needed to expand our counties and do more of a ground game, we increased our budget and we raised about $35 million. And so that was for all of our target states, all of our work. And I think we were very efficient, making sure that we had the highest return on investment for our donors. And one thing that was also really important to us was, if we saw, Faith and Freedom store hanger and America Pack store hanger, we would go back and look at our universes. And then that's why we ended up expanding into some other counties. Cobb County was like really oversaturated. So it doesn't make sense for us to keep going to Cobb County if there are 3 or 4 groups that are already there. So having that data share in place with the different groups was a game changer for us.
What do you talk about faith and freedom, but I know we were talking about how do we get Christians out? How do we get some of these other groups out? You talked about Hunter Nation. What do you think what were some of the key groups that hadn't really had that conversation about coming out to vote, that you guys were able to reach in a different way and push out there, that really made a change in this election?
I think it was conservative women and moms. I think Riley Gaines did a lot of that work too. The Title IX transgender attack on girls and women was a game changer. Going into Election Day, there were over 500,000 less liberal women who had voted compared to 2020 in the battleground states. Over 500,000 in the battleground states. They were underwater in Pennsylvania. They were underwater in most of the states. And then, I mean, how can you tell women for 4 years, you're not a woman, what is a woman, you can't be safe, you have Lake and Riley issues, you have women getting smashed in the face with a volleyball, and the Democrats are saying it's okay, and for all of these women to show up for you. I think that was the biggest surprise that I saw was with women and parents. So that was pretty phenomenal. The other group I thought that was really interesting was the MAHA group, and that was led by Amaryllis Fox Kennedy, RFK Jr.'s daughter-in-law, and her ability to bring awareness to, red food coloring and, food security. That is a game changer, especially for suburban women, and how it's so unaffordable for more people to have access to healthy, fresh foods.
Yeah,
I think
we've talked about that so many times, about just the poisons that we've had so many people on here that have talked about the food coloring, especially just the problems that can cause with children, with ticks, all of this, and moms are suddenly going, man, does my kid actually have a problem, or is my child being poisoned and I don't even know about it? And I think that was a big mover for women. Oddly enough, the only demographic that did not move toward Trump at all was very wealthy white women, which I think is very interesting, because people have made the comment that white women use the oppression, like very wealthy liberal white women use the oppression of others as like a Louis Vuitton bag. Like, oh, I feel bad for this. Like, I feel their victimhood, and it's all fake. And I just kind of wonder if that was created with this mainstream media that is pushing the Oprahs of the world and the J-Los of the world and all of these people that came out for her that were like outrageously wealthy and saying, like, we know what the country needs. And people are going, how the heck do you know what the country needs?
Right.
You flew here on your own jet and you're staying in your 7th home. It's like, how could you possibly know? And then you see all of these other demographics move toward Trump. I wonder if those women will come out again, if those white women, those wealthy white women, will change over time. But also, there was one other weird thing that I wanted to ask you about, because we saw this like massive amount of people that came out for Joe Biden in 2020. And we said, how did over 80 million people come out for Joe Biden? 15 million Democrats are missing suddenly. I saw this post that one guy posted. He was like, America's pastors have all gotten together to discuss the real possibility that the rapture occurred because we lost 15 million Democrats overnight. And it's like, what did happen? I mean, are people looking at that and saying, what happened?
Yeah, well, Kellyanne Conway tweeted this morning, the hidden Kamala Harris voter is still hidden because it's not there. But there's two things. Number one, we saw just the total lack of enthusiasm and just from the left and from her base. And it was interesting because we saw like, oh, there's a movement of women for Kamala Harris. That was the news report on Thursday and Friday going into the weekend before the election. And that's when our team sat down and started doing the data and realized, no, it's not. They actually have less women voters today than before. And then the second thing that I thought was really interesting was on the day of the election, they said there was going to be historic 150% turnout in Philadelphia for Kamala Harris. And it did, in order for her to be as successful, in order for Philadelphia to have carried the state at that point, she would have had to receive like 100% voter turnout, receive every single Democrat vote, every single independent vote, and at least 20 to 40,000 Republican votes. So the math wasn't there. And so that is just like the liberal media gaslighting us again into believing something that wasn't true. I also think we saw a big increase in veterans because her vice president pick was a pathological liar who did not serve the way that he said he was. It was stolen valor, and I still hope he's held accountable for that. But the list of this goes on and on and on. And quite frankly, Tudor, they cheated last time. And I think we need to recognize that. There was a completely different election integrity operation in 2024 as opposed to 2020. Laura Trump and Michael Whatley were so on top of it. And every time we would see something, we would flag it. And within 5 minutes, there was a lawsuit. And it wasn't because of us. They were already in the process of doing it. Right. So, I mean, they absolutely cheated in 2020. There's no doubt in my mind. And the numbers, I think, show that.
Well, we are so impressed with what you guys were able to do. Honestly, I think it was when you said people were questioning the ground game, I think it was because it was the biggest concern. And you mentioned the RNC, totally different situation because they weren't even allowed to play in elections back in 2020. And then everything changed and they were involved in 24 in a major way. And that just changed everything about this election. But for people who are concerned about going forward and they're like, okay, now we have this was created, but how do we keep it? How do they give? How do they get involved?
Yeah, go to americafirstworks.com. We'll get you involved. We're going to still do door knocking. We're still doing text messaging. There's so much opportunity, especially there's short-term and long-term. The first 100 days of a new administration, we're going to have to make sure we're getting the word out about the policies. And then long-term is what does this look like going up to 2026 and 2028? So lots of opportunity across the board for all the coalition work, all the ground game. And just thank you so much. We've loved partnering with you too, Tudor, and I'm excited for the best is yet to come, as the president used to always say.
That's right. Exactly. That's the beauty of it. And, it's so funny because my daughter came home the other day and she was like, the best is yet to come. And I'm like, that's catchy when you have a 13-year-old saying that to you. But I think the whole country obviously not the whole country, but an overwhelming majority of the country has sighed a sigh of relief over the torture that we've been through for the last 4 years. I mean, even looking at the economy and how things are already changing, just outlooks and everything. And I mean, it just is, oh, thank goodness. Yeah. And thank goodness it was such an overwhelming victory. And I know everybody said it has to be too big to rig. And that is what America First Works was all about, making sure it was too big to rig, making sure that we got as many voters out as we could. And those low propensity voters, those people that you knew that don't vote every time, but they care, and you guys got to them. So we are so grateful to you for what you did, because it is amazing to go the popular vote, the electoral college. There is no denying this was a massive win. We're going to do it big. It's bigly. We did it. You guys did it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And Ashley Hayek, if you guys need to find her, look her up. She's amazing. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining us on the Tudor Dixon Podcast. As always, for this episode and others, go to TudorDixonPodcast.com, the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time on the Tudor Dixon Podcast. Have a blessed day.